Turning to the situation in Ukraine now, and civilians remain trapped inside the seaport city of Mariupol, scrounging for food and fuel as Russian forces continue to shell the city of 430,000 people. Satellite photos show the massive military convoy outside the capital, Kyiv, splitting up and fanning out into towns and forests. International leaders have condemned Wednesday's airstrike in Mariupol, which killed 3 people at a maternity hospital. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia's refusal to permit evacuations from the port city amounts to outright terror. Meanwhile, the highest level talks since the invasion began have been held in Turkey but have yielded no results. An estimated 2.3 million people have already fled the country as Kyiv braces for another onslaught. Major General Mick Ryan is a recently retired Australian Army General and he joins us now. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. You've written that Russia has entered a new phase of its war against Ukraine in the past week. How has Russia's campaign shifted?
I think there's 2 elements to how the Russian campaign has shifted. First, they've realised that they can't win this war fast, cheap and easy like they attempted to in the early days. So they've adopted a more methodical and grinding attritional approach, which is about pounding the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military into submission with firepower. But secondly, it's becoming increasingly clear that the Russian advances are starting to stall on all their fronts. In the east, they're not making major gains. In the north, it's increasingly unlikely they'll be able to even surround Kyiv, let alone capture it.
Has the Ukrainian military had to change the way it's trying to meet Russian forces as a result of this shift from the Russian campaign?
I think the Ukrainian military have done most things right so far. Warfare isn't about perfection, it's about relative advantage, and the Ukrainians so far have outfought the Russians, and they've continued to do it. We're hearing that there have been some counter-offensives to the northeast of Kiev in the last 24 hours. So the Ukrainians clearly have a lot of fight left in them. They're fighting to defend their own countries. And frankly, the Russians, having committed all their forces at this point, appear to be starting to run out of puff.
What's the latest information you have about the progress of that long Russian convoy we've been reporting on for about a week now?
I think there's multiple sources reporting now that it's starting to disperse. I think we should expect that. It's actually lots and lots of smaller convoys, and these will be seeking alternative routes or dispersing just to make sure they can't be targeted. So that big 40-kilometre traffic jam that we saw about a week ago, that is dispersed or largely dispersed at this point in time.
And so you say that if that convoy is dispersing and the Russian campaign is stalling on many fronts, what can we expect to happen from here? Are the Russians just going to dig in many places around the country, or are they going to try to concentrate their efforts on securing territory in the east first? What do you expect to unfold from here?
Well, I expect that the Russians will continue to try and advance and terrorise Ukrainian people into some political concessions, whether that is through increasing use of longer-range weapons, as the Pentagon has speculated over the last several days, greater use of firepower, or potentially some unforeseen escalation. President Putin doesn't seem to be someone who's going to take a step backwards. Time is not on his side. We should expect things to get worse before they get better here.
Is there evidence that Ukraine's president is willing to make those concessions to protect his people?
I think the evidence shows that the Ukrainian president is willing to defend the sovereignty of his nation, and so he should. The Russians so far in 3 sets of negotiations don't appear to have turned up and wanted to negotiate in good faith. So the Ukrainians should be very sceptical of any further Russian entreaties at this point. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be talking, but the Russians so far have hardly been reliable interlocutors.
I wanted to ask you about the claim from Russia this week that the United States is operating bio-warfare labs in Ukraine. The US has denied that accusation. What evidence does Russia have for making that claim?
Like just about all Russian claims of misinformation, they have zero evidence. Right from the very start of this war, the Russians have been behind the eight ball when it comes to information warfare. And this is just another subpar, very transparent attempt by the Russians to find some pretext to escalate the war.
And have there been other so-called false flags during Russia's military campaign? And have any of Ukraine's claims during this conflict been found to be false?
Well, one of the great things the US administration did in the lead up to the war was constantly expose intelligence that indicated where the Russians might seek to undertake false flag operations. And the latest statements over the last 24 to 48 hours from the US administration and other areas about chemical weapons is more of the same. It's very clever. It's very good strategic communications from the US and NATO. And I expect that they will continue to do that to try and bring transparency to a very rotten Russian art of misinformation.
All right, Major General Mick Ryan, a recently retired Australian Army General. Terrific to get your view. Thank you.
Thank you.
Heading overseas now, and fierce fighting continues in Ukraine after high-level talks with Russia ended without a ceasefire.
Ukraine says the most critical situation is in the southern city of Mariupol, where more than 1,200 bodies have been collected from the streets. Well, let's go to our correspondent Sean Rubenstein-Dunlop, who joins us from the city of Lviv. Sean, yesterday we spoke to you. We saw those horrendous pictures of the hospital bombing in Mariupol. Can you tell us what's the latest there?
Look, it doesn't stop. Russian forces have been heavily bombing the city of Mariupol in Ukraine's southeast for the 9th day today. The city is under siege, and Ukraine's government says it's the most critical situation of this war, which is saying a lot given the sorts of things we're seeing come out of other parts of the country. Yesterday, as you said, we saw that bombing of the maternity and children's wards of the hospital, and it's since been confirmed that at least 3 people have died, including a 6-year-old girl, and at least 17 people were injured, including pregnant women. Russia has come out in defence of the attack, claiming the city of mass graves, totally destroyed apartment buildings and entire residential areas flattened. And city officials, as you said, say that 1,200 bodies have been recovered from the streets in just the last few days alone. The Red Cross says food and water are in short supply, such short supply that residents are attacking each other, are turning on each other because they're so desperate. And yet again, there was supposed to be a ceasefire in that city today, but yet again, it didn't happen. People weren't able to escape from that city. And the US ambassador to the UN has also come out today and said that the US is documenting war crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine against Ukraine's civilians.
Yeah, we won't hold our breath about that Kremlin investigation. Ukraine and Russia's foreign ministers held talks today again. Was anything of note achieved?
Look, the talks today were the highest level discussions held between Ukraine and Russia since the war began 2 weeks ago. They were held in Turkey. Turkey is a NATO member, but it sees itself as a neutral party and is trying to facilitate negotiations. But that was to no end. There was no progress on a ceasefire and no progress on humanitarian corridors out of Mariupol. So little progress at all. There were, though, temporary ceasefires elsewhere today in besieged regions of Ukraine, and overall 65,000 people have been evacuated so far. And here are a few figures from the war that I find extraordinary. Half of the capital Kyiv's population of about 1.9 million people have escaped so far. 2.9 million people. Half of that population have escaped so far as Russian troops surround the capital in a pincer movement. And now more than 2.3 million people have fled the country, according to the UN. James.
Thank you so much, Sean, and make sure you stay safe over there. Just horrendous pictures, Lisa.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to kind of get your head around exactly.